Hello, and welcome to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke. We're having an ongoing conversation about ideas and current events in which we discuss the underlying connections and the root causes that help us discover what is really true. In that process, we are trying to develop then an antiviral mindset in an age in which we have spiritual and moral corruption and illness and sickness and all kinds of things. Today, we're going to talk about decay, all those D words. That's right. We're going to talk about some points of political crisis, a little bit of Christian nationalism, and we might even venture into a smidgen of architectural observations. All Doesn't matter or not. I'm Mike, and you are?
My name is Luke.
You're Luke. How are you doing?
Let's get started. Yeah, doing good. Our screens are a little different today.
We're trying different camera angles.
It is true, yeah. Technical issues abound.
See, I was giving us a positive. We're just trying something new.
We're just trying something new. That's
you were
right.
saying we had a
It's
problem.
not that my laptop died unexpectedly. That's not it at all.
Hey, I want to start out with something.
Yes.
Because from our last episode, Jeremiah Wright, I made some statements. You and I differed about some things, or there was pushback, and I looked up, and you were right. It's not a Muslim church that...
Jeremiah
Wright in Chicago.
And trying to connect Obama to
Trinity
Islam.
Something, it was just a mainline liberal church. But it was Black Liberation Theology Church, which is connected to Islam. So
I always think of liberation theology as connected to Catholicism and kind of a twisting of Jesus' teachings.
They have a piece of it also.
But I also know throughout Obama's presidency, if not just because of his name, but because of the way he treated the Middle East, there have been accusations of Muslim motivating.
So here's what I'm going to do. I'm doing a correction. I'm leading off with this because I misspoke.
Yeah.
The second thing I think I did is I got in over my head too quickly and didn't stop short soon enough, right? I started talking about, and I thought, you know what? Let's be honest about this, Mike. Let's be honest. Let's be honest when you start going down a path that it's not on second thought.
Yeah.
You're really on first thought.
It's your first go at those.
Yes, that's right. And so it's like, let's just be honest and pull back and say, that was a misstep there.
Well, I think a lot of times when you're first scratching at something, or maybe you've thought about it a long time, but you've never spoken about it.
Yes, that's more.
You realize pretty quickly by putting things into words when you're missing pieces.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's what happened to me. So I did a little looking up, and I found out you were correct. It is a Protestant church. However, the point about Obama himself, I found several articles, and I was just going to read a quote from Dr. Wright here. He was interviewed. Of course, there was things in 2008, things in 2012 when it became politically expedient for the right to kind of chase down their opponent in Obama, right? So some of these things get unearthed. But here's what Jeremiah Wright says to an interview. The Reverend Wright told me on tape, this guy says, Obama came to him and said, I need some spiritual advice. I don't know exactly who I am. And the Reverend Wright said, well, we know your Islam background, but what you need now is some coaching on Christianity. And I asked the Reverend Wright then, did you convert him from being a Muslim to being a Christian? And Wright said, well, I don't know if I could go that far, but I made it comfortable for him to accept Christianity without having to renounce his Islamic background.
Yeah.
So that's probably a good way to try to then say what I was trying to articulate last time was more about if these things are in him, as well as the sexual deviancy, are they things he's been trying to leverage secretly, or do they just flow out of him, out of the dynamic of leadership?
Well, and when you're dealing with all these things, the question in my mind is which one really inspires him?
Yeah, that's
true. I mean, it's hard to say, well, there's one thing, right? It's not ever one motivating.
Yeah.
But is there a thread, intellectual thread, that he's using to rationalize or to make decisions?
And that's why really it's put in the category of a question. Because I have dismissed that accusation that he's really Hussein, Barack Hussein, and he's really a Muslim trying to destroy our country. And I never really paid much attention. But as the deviancy part got put to it more clearly, and where he's running a shadow form now through a puppet that he can't really get criticized for, and now what you see is a wholesale destruction taking place, I thought, I think it's a legitimate question to ask.
Wholesale destruction.
Our country is in being systemically, there's a good, systematically almost assaulted and attacked.
Well, and yeah, the institutions, I've seen some Christians, and we'll get to this in a little bit, arguing over the role of the Constitution in a Christian outlook, right? How much should a Christian default to saying we want the Constitution as our guiding, right?
That's our Christian nationalism discussion.
It does. It kind of bleeds into that.
Yeah.
But the idea being, the assumption in that conversation is that the Constitution still matters in our country, and I see a lot of doubt for that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yes, it has been seemingly being undermined from various ways. So,
Yeah.
boomers in power. What's your thought here?
Well, this really connects to what you're saying.
He's not really a boomer, is he?
No.
He's right underneath it, I would imagine.
Gen X, I would assume. But the boomers in power that I'm thinking of, who's the Republican in the Senate? Mitch McConnell.
McConnell,
who's still having another stare into space.
I watched that one. I didn't really watch the first one. He froze for. It was a long time.
Yeah, past a minute, you're just like, oh my goodness.
It looked like he had a seizure. I thought they were going to come. They handled it really well, but it looked like his hands were frozen to the podium, like he got stuck there. It was freaky to watch.
But there are numerous high-ranking politicians on both parties who. My first assumption, right, our first thought, we've talked about this before, is that they're clinging to power.
Yeah.
But when I watch a frail old man, whether it's Obama or not Obama, but
McConnell
Biden,
looked frail in that.
Yeah, I think this guy's not wielding huge amounts of power.
I know.
So someone else is keeping him in position, right? It's like, okay, these old guys are obedient. Either they've been leveraged, somebody's got something on them that they'll vote, they'll obey, they'll say even what they're told to say. So it's another layer of someone's behind the scenes.
We watched a couple years ago.
You just can't trust. You're losing trust.
A Foreigner concert. We went to this
a
Foreigner, and it was for a summer thing in a small city, right?
Okay.
I just didn't really think about it. There was one guy from Foreigner. There's
one guy
8
left.
guys up there. One of them, and he's super old.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, this is a brand.
Right.
This is a brand. Mitch McConnell is a brand.
Yeah.
Because he's useful to keep something for some other people now.
Right. Well, and that's interesting.
Feinstein.
Because when you say that, it makes me immediately think of the Star Wars brand and how it can just be sold.
Yes, right.
We're just going to sell the whole brand. And Lucas, what else goes with Star Wars when you buy Lucasfilms, as Disney did a few years ago? You get Indiana Jones. And somebody can completely redefine everything about them.
Yes.
And they're still going to make billions, at least in the beginning, because people have that
they trust
loyalty.
That's right.
The trust to the brand.
Yep. I completely agree.
And that totally makes me think about loyalty too. I think of this often when it comes to Trump, or people like Trump, who sort of demand loyalty and are shocked or feel
from a personality
describe being betrayed. That you would go against.
It's high on his personal values.
I had a boss who was like that once, who was very vindictive, and like if you go against him, especially in any kind of public, even semi-public way that you don't agree.
Yeah.
And even after he was no longer my boss,
yeah,
my public disagreements with him about COVID, created this intense, you could just a palpable.
I had the same thing. A friend who wanted loyalty based on even if they were doing something untruthful.
Right.
And when I called out something that was untruthful, they said I was being not loyal to them as a friend.
And I keep thinking my loyalty is to the truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't understand. And I think churches struggle with this. When I hear church leaders talk a lot about unity, I feel like it's a similar sort of leverage point,
like a denominational,
of saying don't speak up when things are not right.
I think you're right. That leads into something I was thinking about is this idea. I read an article, a guy, Edward Ring, he writes for American Greatness, lots of good articles, but it was about that Christianity is inherently anti-woke. And he makes several points, and I don't want to do them all, but he makes points about that they believe God is their ultimate authority.
Yeah.
And which is the thing you just said.
Right.
And that makes them dangerous too, especially then he starts narrating when the state begins to take authority in as if it is the authority of God, as if it's the ultimate authority, not somewhere down on the totem pole, but it's trying to take top dog spot. He's saying they're going to end up revolting against it because they can't do it.
Right.
I can't do it. And so where he ends up suggesting the biggest point of impact is that not when they argue, when the state and Christians argue about moral issues, let's say abortion, they're having an argument. He's saying it's not so much that, but it's when the state says we have the right to make the definitions of moral things and you have to abide by them. And it creates catastrophes. And so he illustrated with, the Sound of Freedom movie, rescuing children that are being traded, enslaved. He says, Christians aren't necessarily going to get into the argument of that. They see a need and they're going to do something.
Right.
And the state, they're going to end up fighting the state because they feel compelled by God and they're being Christian. I have to rescue people from destruction.
Well, so if your value system prioritizes power, right? I need to get my territory defended at all costs. Then the biggest threat is someone who won't obey. And,
yes, exactly.
And so when you're in a political atmosphere, the way you gain obedience is through exchange. Okay, so it's a quid pro quo, or at the worst, right? It's Biden making a phone call saying you got to get rid of that prosecutor that's investigating my son through Burisma, or even Trump, right? There's a questionability to his call to the same president of Ukraine and saying you should investigate my political rival for the same issues. But before you even get to that, there's this thinking that invades, and I've had it invade my marriage. And the thinking is, I did this, and now you owe me that. And it's
we make unspoken agreements.
Yeah, and it's just making your relationships transactional is fundamentally cannot be loving.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so if someone says, I refuse to engage in the transactional when it comes to these issues, right? I'll give you money in exchange for shoes.
Yeah.
Right? I'll give you this for that. That's how economies work.
Yeah.
But there are things about which there is no money.
Yes, that's correct.
And so
there is a middle ground there.
Those people are a threat, though.
Yeah.
To a politically minded person.
The reason it becomes difficult is because we talk about a social contract or our democracy, not that phrase, trademark our democracy, but let's just say 1776, there is an agreement. Yeah. There's an agreement that we think we're going to make some exchanges. I'm going to give you some liberties because then you give me, and we're going to agree this creates for civic peacefulness.
The social compact.
There's a compact element to it that is legitimate, but what you're saying, I hear you saying, is that if that's taken out to its extremes, it becomes illegitimate.
Well, no, I would even say that a social compact I can get along with if people will abide by it. But a social compact assumes that we're both going to tell the truth. And when it becomes about power and territory, then if it will advance your power, lying is on the table.
When you said, so the marriage thing, when you get married, in one sense, there's a little social contract that's being made.
Yeah.
But at another level, what you're saying is that's not true at all. It is a commitment to love somebody, not in exchange for some supposed thing I get back.
Right. That's true. Yeah. And I think I was reading an article of some feminists claim, and I think it's a popular claim among feminists, maybe not recently, but that all marriage is prostitution fundamentally.
Yeah.
Right. It's an exchange of provision for sexual activity.
We're building up a larger conversation at some point to have on the feminism. I think it's a
no, but what I'm connecting is that if power is what you seek, right?
If that's the defining component,
then what you'll do, and this is true of any motive, if you have a strong core motive, then when you see other people behave, you say, oh, they must have that motive too.
Yes, that's right.
Right? And so if everything is an exchange of goods and services, if everything is about acquiring the most for me and the least for you, why wouldn't you see that in marriage, in child rearing, right? Well, I get to sleep in, so why would I have kids?
Yeah.
It's like, that's not what it's for.
And
once you do that, you lose any kind of purpose, any service to a higher good.
Yeah.
You lose it all. It's a nihilistic way to think.
I had told you off camera, I just watched this interview that Tucker does with Adam Carolla. It was an excellent interview. And Carolla asked him a question. He goes, I have friends on the right, friends on the left. And one of my friends on the left told me, Tucker, man, he's having a tremendous amount of success. But he doesn't really believe that stuff.
Right.
And he goes, so Tucker, I want to ask you about that. And Tucker says, that's not true.
Yeah.
He goes, the left ends up saying, they say the party line. But on the right, people don't say the party line.
Well, they do, but not as much.
There's some, yes, that's right. And he goes, I don't believe I've ever said something I didn't think. I've changed my mind and thought I was wrong.
Right.
But that's not, I always say what I think is true. And it's like, it's projection is what it is.
Anybody who does that now, it falls into this category of the unruly.
That's right. That's right.
And outside the norm. And therefore, now, and the stamp du jour is far right.
Yeah.
But it's laughable to see even commentators like Tim Pool get called far right, who are punk rock, old-fashioned liberals.
Russell Brand.
Yeah, those guys. What they are, though, is they refuse to say, "I'll give up the truth in exchange."
I always drop his name, Greenberg, down in South America.
Oh, Glenn Greenwald.
Greenwald. Yeah, same thing. He's not far right. It's just. The last thing I'll mention on this article that he had 5 reasons, but the last one, which applies to what we just said, is that he says Christians, because of their belief in heaven and an afterlife, they, in general, obviously there's exceptions and etc., but they're willing to lose their even life and their possessions.
They're almost excited about it.
They can become that. They see something else in it. But if you have a secular worldview and a state-driven worldview, what is there beyond wealth and power?
Right.
There isn't anything.
And I do see why pastors will talk about being excited. Almost, they don't say excited, but you hear it. That like America could turn against Christianity, and that maybe we'll get to live what the Roman persecutions are. And it's like you don't understand how bad that was, and how much grace there is that we don't have to suffer that.
Yeah, that is true.
At the same time, if you are in that, when you live it, if you're following God, it's all or nothing. And so you don't have the halfway committed church members who leave because you said the wrong word on a Sunday sermon.
Yeah, that's
right.
right.
And I could see that from a pastor's perspective, feeling relief.
Yeah.
That like at least those people are gone. Yeah. And everybody who's here, it's here because they want God, not because they thought our band had the best instruments.
Yeah. Christianity, inherently anti-woke. But that's a theory. That's what we're talking about. It's only a theory. What do you got on that?
Is it Christianity anti? Well, I think so.
I think it is, but
simply
when we
for
talk
the
about
sake
ideas,
of what I call, we keep using the word woke, and I like using it as a pejorative, but in reality, I think at its fundamental is an envy of success. Right, one of the hallmarks of the woke trainings that I used to go to as a public educator is to talk about how meritocracy is a myth and it can never be, and it's seen as a fundamental. I see it as a fundamental attack on those who are successful, whether it's wealth or anything else, that we have to bring the successful down to our level. And what inspires it, or what it creates in kids especially, as I've watched, is a mentality that I'm a victim, I'll always be a victim.
Yes, victim.
In fact, being a victim gives me an increased social status in this paradigm.
I know it.
And what Christianity
Because
at its heart
virtue.
is you cannot be a Christian, even if, no matter how victimized you are, you can't be a Christian until you see yourself as a victimizer.
That's correct.
That you have done wrong.
Both are true.
And so indeed you are a victim, but even then,
That's right.
you are obligated, in order to receive forgiveness, you are obligated to be willing and generously give forgiveness to those who ask, no matter how bad.
Yeah, that's
they
a good
wronged you.
point. So the call to become a Christian in those terms would be, 1, to repent of your oppressor status, and 2, forgive where you were oppressed and let go of it.
Which is why Trump is clearly not a Christian.
Well,
When he openly says, and has never, to my knowledge, recanted that he has no need to repent or turn from any sin because he's just so excellent in everything.
Yeah.
It's laughable to try to say he's a Christian. The only way you could do it is to say in some secret room that we don't know about.
And now I'm going to make a pushback.
All right, push.
The thief on the cross. You could make statements. Lot. If that hadn't been said about Lot, we would have said this in the New Testament. His righteous soul was vexed. We would have said about Lot the things we say about Saul, or the things we say about Ahab and Jezebel, that Lot was not a follower of God. But the New Testament gives us this stunning, from what we see, we didn't know that he was vexed.
Wait, thinking of the story of Lot, because the thief on the cross says, I deserve to be here. So
I
he's
understand,
confessing his
but
sin.
What I'm saying, well, on the thief on the cross is a different set of things, and that would be more the theological. What did he know? Did he know Jesus is Messiah? Did he even, he'd never heard of, I don't think he did.
Well, there's no one in Jerusalem who didn't know what Jesus was about.
Okay, no, I think they knew something was going on and that God was involved. But
But
the articulation of what Messiah, what Trinity, what Son of God, Son of Man, all these things, they take hundreds of years to develop.
Right. So Messiah, though, is not necessarily like Son of God or
I know.
divine, right? It's simply that
I know. It's the anointed one.
It's the Son of David. The Son of David is here. He's anointed to be king.
He's the anointed one.
He acknowledges
in the Old
that when he
Testament.
says, remember me when you come in your
Okay, I
kingdom.
agree. But I also think it's limited. I don't think he really knows what's going on.
But everyone is limited when they become a Christian.
But wait, here's my pushback with Trump.
Okay.
You can't, I think it's unwise to declare this person's not a Christian, because you look at a set of things you're looking for, criteria for them to meet.
Right.
But when we look in Scripture, we can find examples of people who don't meet what seem to be obvious criteria, and yet the Bible says things about them. They are God followers. And so we have to be careful.
Repent is step one.
Okay, I agree with that, but you can't define what repent means or includes. You can't say that it has to look the way you want it to look.
I'm not saying it, I'm saying it has to look some way, right? Because
I
faith
agree.
without works is
But
nothing.
how do you know there isn't some way? How do you know, I'm playing devil's advocate here, right?
Okay.
With Trump, that he at some point, let's say Stormy Daniels, right?
Yeah.
And he says to his kids, to his family, maybe he apologizes to Melania. Maybe this was before her. I don't even know the timelines. I don't care about the timelines. I'm just trying to illustrate. And he says, I just should, that brought so much grief. I wish I had never done that.
Yeah.
We don't know that.
Right.
So, and it may be, we just don't know what kinds of repentance. And this gets back to the story I told last week about being in college, when people were mad at me because I had rock music and a fast car and I had a bad attitude. Mm-hmm. But those weren't my front lines at all. I was trying not to cuss, to do drugs, and not be involved with girls.
But if someone openly says, I don't meet the requirements to be Christian,
well,
you can wonder if they met those requirements outside of your view later on. But you can't make the argument that, well, maybe he really is.
So
and
I'm
he was
not,
just saying
but I'm
that.
not making the argument he is a Christian.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I think you can't say he isn't. You shouldn't say, I don't think you should say it, unless he raises his hand and says, I am not a Christian. I do not believe this stuff.
He loves 2 Corinthians, doesn't he? Isn't that his favorite book? 2 Corinthians?
Yeah, but you know what? Okay. In defense, that is an East Coast way of saying it.
Or at least
people
British.
made fun of him, but that was totally off.
No, I don't see that. Being unfamiliar with the Bible's nomenclature is no evidence
that one's not
of any
even
faith.
unfamiliar.
Right.
2 Corinthians, that's how they preach in the Midwest. Preachers say 2 Thessalonians. Turn to 2
Did they say
Thessalonians.
Isaiah?
Did he say Isaiah?
No, but my friends from England do. Isaiah, what was the other one?
Yeah.
Habakkuk.
Okay, it's only a theory. What were you? We got caught up there. What's your thing on it's only a theory?
So I hear Christians often want to comment on science because science is wielded in a political and in a religious way against them. And I respect that, and I don't think science should be used that way. But science was born out of Christianity because an orderly universe...
scientific movement that we have today.
Yeah, science as we understand it was born, the scientific method, the pursuit of a rational explanation for the world and the universe. All of that comes from saying God is rational. He has his laws,
Yes,
so therefore we
that's true.
should be able to observe laws within the universe. It's not chaos. It's not random. It's not the whims of some angry deity that make the rain come and go, that there's temperature changes, and
it's
we can
the
observe.
consistency of the deity.
Because God is
makes
consistent.
the laws of the world.
Right.
According to his nature.
There's a phrase that I hear Christians use that if you're a Christian and you use this phrase, I want to encourage you to stop because it makes you sound stupid. Can I just say that? The phrase is, it's only a theory.
I'm gonna hold my right to hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
And,
don't
agree
sound
or not
stupid now,
agree.
Mike. I've put a name on it.
Yes,
so
you
when you
shamed
say
me before I even got the chance to
to
disagree.
defend, okay, I did it again. I backed you into a corner. So science consists of 2 things, right? It consists of observation of natural phenomena. You observe them in a measurable and a consistent and repeatable way.
Okay.
And then you make theories to explain those phenomena.
And you repeat. Right?
Now, in the process of forming a theory requires scientific experimentation.
Sure.
You might have a hypothesis.
You want to test it.
But the hypothesis is about a specific phenomena. And you might remember this, right, from your middle school science class when you study the scientific method. Each individual experiment is testing a hypothesis that you think this might be the way the outcome might go this way. Let's test it. And you measure and you're consistent You're repeatable. But it stops at theory. All of science is observation and theory. Mm-hmm. So to say it's only a theory is to say it's only science.
Give us an example of something we don't think of as theory, but found out that it was.
So wait, I don't know what you mean.
Oh, like the sun is the center of the universe.
Okay,
I mean,
the center of the solar system. Yeah, right.
Heliocentric and
so
geocentric.
That's the best explanation.
That's a great one.
It's the best explanation for the observable data.
Well,
and the
first explanation was that the Earth is the center of the universe.
That's right. And it was reasonable based on the observations they had made.
Lots of observation, lots of time.
It's obvious that these celestial bodies move through the sky.
It's clear that it was assumed to be fact and true. Clearly, everybody would believe this.
Right.
Okay.
So the reason, the counter evidence is the movement of the planets. If you study the history,
or to me say it, but there was some problems in that.
Right. So they formed a new theory.
There was some anomalies at meet, and people saying,
but the idea to say that the sun is the center of the solar system, I mean, we can observe it with incredible accuracy now, right? With different satellites that have traveled to different planets. We predict with incredible...
Okay, wait, you're jumping ahead though. Make the next step first.
It's still only a theory.
The old theory got overthrown because somebody came along and assessed the data. They came up with a new theory based on their observations and assessments. And that actually seemed to fit better. And now you're then making the point. Theory. Because here's what, let me be your devil's advocate on this. I'm the general population, and I say, see, the sun is the center of the universe. We were just wrong. Now we're right.
Correct.
And now you're going to say,
you could be wrong later.
Yes,
that's right.
That's your point.
But beyond that, beyond saying whether you should rely on science in a religious way, but to say if anytime someone says the statement "science proves." Mm-hmm. It's an automatic indicator that they're using science in a manipulative way. They're not actually scientists.
Yeah.
And when you listen to it, they're either media journalists or they're politicians or they're pastors.
Yeah.
Science proves. Science never proves anything.
Yeah.
Math proves things because it's pure logic. Mm-hmm. It's a logical progression, but even math and all science fundamentally is based on some core assumptions, not proved, right? 1 + 1 = 2 is an assumption based on the meaning of how you can even count things, right? Or that a point and a line have these definitions. They're axiomatic, is what you say in mathematics. They're not provable, they're assumed, and from that assumption, we prove.
Well, in rationality, this is your getting back to Francis Schaeffer. He would have said that rationality is built on those assumptions. It's not, we can't function without them. The law of non-contradiction, you can't be A and non-A at the same time in the same place in the same manner. Else we can't function in the world.
Right.
The people who say you can, the great point is then, well, go stand in traffic where the cars is and see if you can function in the same place in the same way as that vehicle.
And I think what happened through the Enlightenment and on into modern day, because I would call them, recently I started calling in the past I've called them neocons or the type of conservative that's like for the Chamber of Commerce conservatives. But I think what it really is they're Enlightenment conservatives, that they think their rational progression of thought can supersede and solve all the world's problems, rather than saying, there's a friend of mine and I, we go back and forth about the Bible as brothers, right? We enjoy it, and one of the things we always come back to is just because it's logical doesn't mean it's biblical, and making logical conclusions can lead you to pride very easily, right? The Bible says that knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. And so what I want to encourage you, anybody who's trying to make solid arguments, which I want you to do, about how Christianity impacts the modern world, don't overstep. Don't stand out on a limb and say things like it's just theory. Because of course it's just theory. That's like saying it's just science. And saying something is just science is a valid thing to say. Okay, you just need to know what you're saying.
So your argument is when you say it's just a theory, you're pointing out that there's an unobserved assumption that there are scientific things that aren't theories, they're conclusions that we never have to address again.
So if someone says it's scientific fact, right, that's what they're saying. When it's just a theory, it's not fact, it's a theory.
Right, and they're making that distinction. You're saying that's actually not a healthy distinction.
Well, not only that, it's not as if above a theory is fact, that there's some hierarchy.
Right, there's not a black and white line.
It's not true. Theory is the end, it's the highest.
Yeah.
Right?
Even about things that we think I don't think this is ever going to be concluded differently.
Well, here's an example, right? I mean, we were talking about the planet's motion as well.
Mm-hmm.
And the planet's motion can be explained using Newtonian calculus and physics, right? So Newton really concluded our understanding in a lot of ways.
I was wondering if you're going to go this direction.
But then we get to Einstein's relativity, and it breaks the whole thing wide open. Because one of the things Newton still never explains, and it's actually really hard, I don't know that there is a modern explanation, I haven't kept up on it, is why gravity works.
Mm-hmm.
Like light makes sense that the light bulb or the star or the sun emits a photon that strikes the cornea, right? And your optic nerve receives that information and your brain forms an image. But how does something reach out and pull? Mm-hmm. That doesn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that there's even still an explanation except Einstein's bending of space-time.
This is the start of when I told you I have a different perspective on postmodernism than you. Okay. My ideas of postmodernism, my understanding of it, relate to the development of the theory of relativity.
Yeah, born out of that.
And the
motion is relative.
Yeah,
based on your frame.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And time itself.
Yeah. Right.
And therefore, yeah. And so I think it
can
gets
I give a quick summary? Those that aren't
yeah.
familiar with relativity, it's in popular culture a lot, but I don't know that everybody has a grasp on its fundamentals. But simply stating that space and time, from a relativity standpoint, are the same substance. It's called space-time. In the same way that matter and energy are actually the same. So the famous
or they're
equation,
on a continuum, it seems.
Well, that they can be interchanged, right? So in the same way that potential and kinetic energy, right? You lift up an object.
This is the E equals mc squared.
Correct, and they're not the same thing, but they're related. So energy equals mass times some constant, the speed of light, and it simply means that all matter, all mass, can be converted to energy. They're the same thing with in some huge amount.
Yes.
And then with space and time,
at least that's our working theory.
The way that you travel through time is related to the way you travel through space.
That's right.
That space and time are a continuum.
That's right.
Yeah. If you watched Star Trek growing up,
they're deeply connected. Yes.
Yeah.
Interesting thing.
But
it's only a
you're
theory.
You're saying postmodernism, which I is my understanding too, was born out of this idea that the way you measure something as fundamental as time alters based on your frame of reference. And people took that and said, well, maybe that applies to my religious.
I would say it's one of the 2 or 3 legs of the chair of which we understand postmodernism today.
So why do you therefore give it less? Because I see it as a destructive force, that misunderstanding of the science applied into sociology.
So we're going to do the postmodernism. So my thinking, I think there's a postmodernism that is in error because it destroys objectivity, objective truth.
I see it as the counterpoint to Enlightenment rationalism, right?
However, I think the way it got where it got was driven by philosophical destruction of objectivity, which starts with Kant, and it goes through Hume in some different places. But there was a destruction, especially with Kant, that you can't know, and so you have this thing forming. As it's forming and shaping philosophy and ideas, and even we're going to get to architecture for you in a moment, this other thing is taking place scientifically in the scientific community.
Right.
And it ends up going through Einstein and ends up into quantum mechanics and Heidegger's stuff. And in that process, there's the discovery of a relative nature to what would be what we would call Newtonian physics, before the hard physics.
Yeah.
On the surface, so to speak, or let's call it one layer down of reality. When they kept going further down, some observable by science and some theoretical by math,
right,
they began to think there's another layer down there. So now we have 2 physics realms. We have Newtonian physics and whatnot that are based in this objectivity, an objective world.
Yeah.
And now we have this other one based on this idea that the world has a fluidity to it that we never knew. It has a relativity to it. Perspective. There is no neutral observer in the world anymore. There used to be. So Newton and the apple falls, let's just say, he's an objective observer, and they do what you were talking about: observe and theorize and test, observe and theorize and test. But they assumed they were objective and outside of it.
Right.
Einstein's work came along and produced the ideas that says nobody is outside of it. And so they did all the tests in space about the guys that had watches on and times, and they moved. And you get two different people doing different things, and they had a different reality experience. Or they did the same reality, and they had a different time experience on their clocks.
Yeah.
And they realized, oh my goodness, reality does comport to you as the individual. It always does. And to me, that's an element of postmodernism that's accurate. Now, to make that say there's no truth, I don't think that's warranted.
So,
but I do
connect
think
it to the
it's
idea
relative.
of abandoning rational thought.
Well,
You're saying because we struggle, because here's
these two
from a
things
science
met-
perspective, right? To say, well, when we make observations on the objects that are incredibly small, right? We're talking electrons, muons, tachyons, these tiny particles, smaller than atoms.
Yes.
That when we make observations about them, it seems to alter them. And
yes.
It seems inescapable that we
that's
can
right.
make these
That seems
measurements.
Yes.
But the act of measuring, the act of observing,
Yes, that's correct.
even affects their outcomes
That's
of
right.
where they travel and how they behave.
That's working out the Einstein on the science side.
But so I think people in search of moral independence to say, I don't need God to tell me what to do.
Now you're jumping fields.
They took that and
Yes.
brought it over.
Well, I don't know. Yes,
and said,
they
well,
did.
just like me, I'm a precious snowflake, and my moral frame can be totally independent of reality.
Or how about
and I'll
saying it this?
whatever makes me happy.
When that was discovered, they said, aha, see?
Yeah.
Told you Kant was right. And the other thing that Kant did is he took God out. He divided the numinous and the phenomena and said that God is in a realm that we can't know. Therefore, he's banished, and we can't let his stuff come into this world to help us understand it. And from there proceeded the ideas that, and it is a logical assumption from there to destroy objective truth. There is no good, there is no right, there is no wrong. It is all relative to you as the individual.
So I thought Kant said he was a Christian. Am I wrong about that?
Kant is a Christian guy.
So how can he say that
because
you can't access
he was a
the
philosopher.
divine?
Just because he was a Christian man, I think he was inconsistent in what he thought, but he's trying to make sense of the world as a philosopher.
Yeah, but one of the foundations of Christianity is that God would come and reveal himself.
I understand.
So that is the infinite becoming finite.
He doesn't
right?
necessarily think that is knowable in the same way. He's
What's
hard
interesting
to read,
about that?
But Descartes
I haven't
a Christian.
done. I've read
agree.
about Kant. I haven't
Yeah.
really read him.
Yeah.
But what's interesting in thinking of that is both quantum theory on one side, which is the super small particles, and then relativity, which is the super large, high speeds, high mass, right, gravity, etc., is that it is so far at the extremes, right?
Okay, say it again. I had one of those blank out, thinking Kant and trying to explain it.
So we've got relativity,
Okay.
we've got quantum theory. They're on opposite ends of size and speed.
Relativity and quantum theory.
Quantum theory.
You mean in terms of subatomic versus macro?
Yes.
Einstein in space?
Microscopic.
Okay, that's fine.
Microscopic
Sure.
to the
They're
point,
dealing
right?
with different parts of the universe.
But they're the things that are so small you can't observe them. That's
Yes.
quantum theory.
Yeah.
Things that are so large you can't observe them. That's relativity.
Okay.
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 So you can observe the things that God has displayed, both through his written word, inspired men to write it, and by nature, right? By other people's testimony. Now, if you dig deep enough, you'll get to the extremes, to the things too small to see, the things too big to fathom. You can get there about God.
Okay.
So in those places, you do have to accept mystery
Okay.
as a present reality
Okay.
within your faith.
Okay.
But you don't live in the mystery.
I agree.
You live in reality.
I agree. That's why I think it's a misstep, because so when Kant puts God in the numinous, what he's ending up doing is saying faith, he's going back to your thing of scientific method. Faith doesn't have a role here.
Right.
I banish faith to something else. He is a Christian. Kant says, I'm a Christian. I have faith. But that has nothing to do when I then live in this world. And you and I don't necessarily agree with that. It has nothing to do with it.
That's
right? It's
right.
not a step in the scientific method, but we think it has a lot to do with it. It underpins it. It undergirds it.
A common fallacy within the science history is the God and the machine fallacy, right? The Deus ex machina. That whenever you run into some natural phenomena that you can't explain, you say, well, it's just God. You know, he just does it.
Yes.
Right?
These
And
are
that's
the
a mistake. And the reason it's a mistake is because the endeavor of science is rational explanations for natural phenomena.
I agree with what you just said, but when you said a mistake, if you were saying you were talking about your two ends, you would have said it's not a mistake, because you're not going to be able to figure out the massive, massive big and the massive small. So,
well, but we seem to be figuring them out.
I mean, we're working on it.
Yeah, we're climbing into those crazy holes.
But what you're saying is we live in the middle, and it's good to be stretching.
Yeah.
But you also, by your word, you were indicating, but those edges, there's got to be some element of mystery. It's good to keep looking,
right?
But we also have to embrace, man, this is tough stuff.
Well, I would say in the extremes,
not just two edges? What if it's also spiritual beings? What if it's four-dimensional, that graph, right? And there's many things as you stretch out, you get into areas in which we're in over our heads with our fallen capacity now.
Yeah. I would say in the extremes, there are things you struggle to find. And it looks like my camera's dead for some reason.
Well, look at this. It's just going to be me.
It's just you. In the extremes of rational thought, you're going to find craziness. That is what we're finding, right? The idea that quantum entanglement, I don't know if you've heard about this, two different particles can be entangled and mimic each other at vast distances instantaneously.
Well, the observable begins to move into the theoretical, and it's a gray line.
But I think you see that in the same way. When you read the Bible, you get into these questions. We've delved into them a little bit of like, what is it when it talks about giants, or when it talks about,
principalities,
what
powers,
really happens at baptism, or all these different questions that
spiritual
realities you can ask when you dig deeper.
Yeah,
and some of them you have to answer, and some of them you have to be content without. But then at the same time, there are like miracles at the edges.
That's right.
Right? There are these interactions with the divine. There are stories of angels
That's right.
that are real stories, real interactions. And so you say, wow, there's these phenomena that don't fit into our normal paradigm.
Yes.
Right? Just like when you look at Newtonian physics works for everything that you're going to touch and interact with.
For the observable world you work in.
That's right.
That's correct.
And then
completely.
But when you reach the edges, it feels like the rules change all of a sudden.
That's right. That's right.
And that's how the Bible is too.
Yeah, I agree with that. So that's why I think postmodernism has a healthy side to it. In a sense, it has taken us out and said the Newtonian world is not all that exists in all of life.
Okay.
There are quantum, I'm just illustrating now.
No, I'm hearing you.
There are quantum dynamics to everything.
Right.
But I think the mistake they've made is then say, well, it's only that, and therefore you can't know anything. It is all relative to you. And I think, no, big mistake.
That's interesting too, because if you look at the way they handle the extremes when it comes to like sexual behaviors, suddenly it becomes all about those extremes, right? That's what we're seeing.
Yeah, that's correct.
Which is a kind of expression of that
you
same
are the
sort of
deity
science.
And it's your truth.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
But see, what's interesting, I think, also about it is that in the quantum mechanics world of science, a lot of scientists are turning back to God.
Because they're butting up against real mystery.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And they are saying there's another mind involved here.
But part of what that is, if they're being honest in their search for truth, is not just to say, oh, we ran into something inexplicable, an inexplicable phenomena. I don't think that by itself would lead you back to God. Instead, what needs to happen is that you run into something that says, this is so beautiful and so well crafted and so perfect.
Think that's happening.
I think that's what's happening.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? And that's where the intelligent design gets really interesting, that kind of question. I don't know if you've delved into that much.
Yeah, a bit. So anyway, then what postmodernism does for me in terms of on second thought is postmodernism enables me to say that we, as a Christian, what I end up saying with it is this. The reason I think quantum mechanics throws us for a loop personally is because we are in a sin-corrupted world and we don't, it's an issue of epistemology, or how to know what we know.
Okay.
We can't know anymore. We're cut off from the foundation of our universe and ourselves, which is God.
Yeah.
And we are now swimming in an ocean with no moorings. That's what sin is.
Right.
We let go of the shore. We let go of the foundation. And we said, we can make it on our own. And all of a sudden, we don't even know where we are. Mm-hmm. That's fundamental to what sin has done to us. So what I think postmodernism does, it affirms that. We are lost.
Well, and what I've seen it do with people like Richard Rohr or Deepak Chopra or these others, right? I call them the Oprah pastors. because Oprah loves to host all those guys, is they'll take the idea which postmodernism and some of this modern science has introduced, that not everything is certain, and they'll conclude nothing is certain.
Yes, and I think that's a mistake.
I mean, that's an easy error.
I think that's wrong.
But it's so obvious.
But it's not wrong to have concluded that there is relativity worked into all of this.
Yeah.
That is not, I prefer the term perspective, because the whole Einstein experiments were based on the perspective of each astronaut determined what happened in the time and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And another astronaut, from their perspective, it got shifted. And so what that leads me, and I think it has a good outworking even, let's say, in theology. It gives us space for this. So I just met your parents for the first time today, right? Never met them before. As I'm talking with them, I see you in both of them, right?
Yeah.
What it does is this. It recognizes that when you and I try to, in many respects, our life is geared towards fundamentally the same thing in a macro perspective especially.
Right.
But we're going to be geared towards it differently. We're going to bring to it different thoughts. And perspectivalism is not an unhealthy thing, as long as it doesn't become the king and rule everything.
Right.
Then it destroys everything.
Yeah.
But when it's a real functioning ingredient, we can have something that I believe very, very strongly and think is very, very clear. And you might believe something else that's very strong and we might have a severe disagreement.
Yeah.
And at some point, I think what postmodernism actually helps us do is say, I still think I'm right. I want to hear him as best I can.
But you can be at
peace. I still think I'm right, but I'm at peace. I'm okay.
Yeah.
And because God will someday show us, maybe we're both wrong.
Well, and a lot of
maybe,
Christians, a lot of Christians have overdone their certainty.
I totally
oversold
agree.
it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I think you do have to have room to say, well, there are going to be people in heaven unexpectedly.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
I
that
completely agree.
we can't just put
maybe Trump will be one of them.
Yeah, God willing, right?
God willing.
That there's, but if he is, we still can be certain that he'll be there because there was a humbling.
Yes.
Do you see what I mean? So
I
we
may
don't
not
see all
it,
things.
I may not know what it is. Maybe categories
That's
I
right.
would not have thought would have been the first ones that would have been good.
That's right.
But yes, and I remember a friend of mine many years ago, we walked through a store and we saw a pen on sale, and it was like $100 for a pen. And I just made this comment. I'm 22 years old. That's so stupid, $100 for a pen. And he says to me...
Have you seen what people pay for pens these days?
He says to me, you say that because of how much money you have. You may not say that if you had multiple millions of dollars. That may not be
right.
a critique that you would offer. Maybe it would be, but it may not. And I thought, you know what? He's right. There are things we think that are relative to who we are and where we are. And I think postmodernism has helped us to recognize them.
Is it a counter reaction to the arrogance of the Enlightenment?
That's okay. So that's where I was going to go.
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't necessarily say the Enlightenment, though it has Enlightenment tentacles in it or weave through the thing. But what I would say is that one of the things that came from the Reformation / Enlightenment on the good side, theologically, was what's been called foundationalism. Foundationalism tries to say, it builds its apologetic from, well, we know this is true. And this is what Descartes fundamentally did. When he comes down, I think, therefore I am. That's where he tried to strip away everything that he stripped away, and he comes down, that can't be changed. And then he tried to start building back up.
Yeah.
And so you have this idea that developed for several hundred years, that the Christian message is one starting with certainties. So Bishop Butler's, the whole book on the eye and the observable science, how the odds of making the eye, this is early intelligent design is what it turns out to be.
Yeah.
But his apologia, I forget now the name of what Butler sings, Miracle, I don't remember. Anyway, it was based on this approach that if I can get down to something we all know to be true, objectively, absolutely, then I'm just going to add layer, even if I got to slow down for you to make real small steps, layer and layer, and I'm going to get up to Christianity.
Yeah, right.
And I think that was very appealing, pleasing, and I think it was actually a wrong way to do it. Because, and even all the way back to Pascal, we said we would someday talk about Pascal, Pascal Wager, because he is opposite of that. He was a postmodern he was a postmodern as a result of Kant and philosophy without Einstein having to come along and shore it up and give it clarity.
Sure. You can see the mysteries.
And in the mystery of it, he appealed to having faith for completely different reasons. They were not linear, foundational, build truth. And now you have to be a Christian or you're irrational. Even though I think it's true, Christianity is a rational thing, there was almost a forced logic in it that I'd evangelize you by forcing you to submit to the argument.
Right.
And that is just not true.
Well, I think faith and reason are at odds with each other in the same way that your head and your heart are at odds with each other.
I was just going to say that.
Which is, in a healthy situation, they're not at all.
The heart has reasons of which the mind knows nothing.
Right, yeah. And I think that's true.
I do think
But I
it's
also
true.
think if faith tries to invade reason, it's doing so at its peril, right? To say, well...
I know, this is where it gets difficult.
So if faith is a relational expression of the trust you have,
and it's reasonable
in a person. Now that trust can be broken. You can be, think of marriage. You can be betrayed to such a degree that trust seems
which is not a logical process. It's the destruction of trust that happens. It's relational.
Well, there's evidence to it.
There is evidence,
right?
But that's not the same thing.
But here's where it doesn't work. There's no amount of evidence that you can provide someone that will force them to trust.
Yes, that's right.
Right? Like, look at all these things.
That's a good way to put it. You can't build it back up.
You have all
step
this
by
evidence.
step.
You have all this evidence.
Yes, that's right.
Whether they've betrayed you or not. Maybe it's not someone you know.
Yes. Yep.
But trust comes from something that's not irrational. It's not irrational. There is evidence to it.
Non-rational?
But it's intuitive. It's mysterious.
It's
for
more.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly.
I mean, you see this. Too. Sometimes you'll see this in men trying to convince women why they're the best choice, right? In a future spouse or for commitment.
Yeah.
And it's like, here's all
very rationally.
They see it as a job interview almost, right?
Yes.
And that's not how it works.
No.
Yeah.
For very, very few.
But at the same time, if you said, I'm going to go build that bridge and it's going to be based on whether I trust things, you're like, that's not a good way to build a bridge. And so rationality and science has its own purpose.
Yeah.
And to say, well, one has to submit to the other is to misunderstand both of them.
Okay, we're going to jump into your architecture here in just a sec. I want to ask one more question, though, on this topic.
Speaking of art and science.
Yes. One more question on this. I'm going to guess your architecture goes along lines we've been going along anyway.
Yeah.
But you made the statement, logical, and the second time you done it, you did a couple episodes ago. Logical does not mean biblical.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily mean biblical.
Right.
Yeah, you didn't. Yeah, not necessarily. I agree with what you said, and I know the context in which it could be an appropriate statement. However, could I have a pushback to it? I agree with you, but could I also have a definition-oriented pushback to make another side seen? And it would be this. The only reason your statement is true is because the logic you're fleshing out is limited to what you see and know. It's all you got to work with. And it seems completely clear to you and this other person, so to speak. But then when the Bible says something different, or it doesn't make the same argument, what we're left to say is not that they're at odds, but to acknowledge the limitations we possess. There may be things we don't know that someday we may know, or we may discover in this life even, that make us understand when the Bible said this, that seemed to be different, or maybe it wasn't functioning. We weren't using the correct, we thought we had all the logic steps.
Yeah.
But we were limited in our perspectives.
Well, and I would say, and I think the phrase, if I wanted to quote correctly, is just because it's logical doesn't mean it's biblical.
Yes.
So everything, if the Bible rightly understood, will always be logical. But there are steps of logic. You could say, well, if this is true, then that's true, and then this, and then this. Yeah. And then pretty quickly, it can only take two steps, and suddenly you've forgotten whole sections of the Bible.
Just because it's logical doesn't mean it's true.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying...
Because you can't see all ends. That's what you're saying.
Yes. And,
right.
And
so
my
I think
pushback would be that everything logical is true. So when we say it that way, just because it's logical, we have to put little air quotes around the word logical. Because what we're meaning is, just because it's logical, as far as you and I can see at this moment.
Because it seems logical.
Because it seems logical. And we're both persuaded. And we can't even imagine what other piece of data could come in to change it.
Well, so here's an example. We were discussing how should the church teach about money. And so there's this prosperity gospel that we have to consider that's common in a lot of people's backgrounds, that's popular culture sees a lot of it, that God wants you to be healthy, wealthy, and wise, right? And if you finish with that, you can create a lot of logical conclusions that are unbiblical.
Yes, that's a great example.
So you have to hold that in one hand, and then the
right.
other say, and also sometimes God will lead you to suffer. In fact, Jesus said, if you're going to follow me, you will suffer. Right? Life is full of suffering.
All who are godly will
and so
suffer persecution. Yeah.
Sometimes you'll suffer because Satan thwarts the good things God wants to do.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll suffer because God thwarts you because you're going down the wrong path.
Or
sometimes it'll be both.
Yeah.
It'll be God saying, look, for your good, you're not doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
But you could be stronger. You could be better. And so here's Satan to mess with you.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? That's the story of Job. That's the story of the Apostle Paul, who's thorn in the flesh.
Yeah.
Was a messenger of Satan.
Yeah.
That God said, you're going to live with it because my grace is enough.
And we have no indication that Paul did anything wrong that's
to deserve that. It wasn't that you did this wrong and now you're punished.
That's right.
And not only that, but to say grace, my grace is sufficient, right?
Yeah.
I've been playing with this idea of grace meaning, right? It means a gift. It means more than just say, like, it means that he likes you. So there's a relational aspect.
Charis has the word, which is grace. It has the word gift in it, but its root is the word joy.
Interesting. Yeah. But so if I equate if I'm thinking of his grace, right? And our church is called Grace, for crying out loud. But his grace means at some level, God finds joy in you.
Yeah.
Right? He looks at you and it's not just saying, I forgive you for the wrongs you keep doing.
That's right. That's right.
Man, I really am rooting for you.
This is my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased.
Right. And so to say, okay, his grace is sufficient, therefore he's going to make you suffer.
Yes.
Because he likes you.
Yes. That is biblical logic, but it is not the logic we would ever in 100 million years have.
I thought I was supposed to be healthy and wealthy, right? Yeah. Everybody's supposed to like me and grow in favor with God and man. Everything's supposed to get better.
Some of it, I think, is that there are two kingdoms, two realms that we live in, and I often think of ourselves as a people. We're bipolar people. Christians are bipolar in this sense. I'm just using that facetiously.
Okay,
we have a foot in two worlds. We have a foot that we're made in a new world, in a new kingdom, and
dual citizenship.
We have a dual citizenship, and it isn't just a citizenship, but we actually live in those worlds, and they define who we are and how we live, but their rules are different. So in the one kingdom of heaven, it comes in and says, I love you so much, I'm going to hurt you.
Right.
In the other world, that is not the logic at all. The other world's logic is that you do well and it will go better with you.
But it's a simplified logic because it doesn't take long to say, well, actually, and the Bible uses this metaphor, what father doesn't inflict pain to discipline on their children because he loves them? And I think, I think I used this last time, what coach isn't inflicting pain on his athletes?
Yeah, that's right.
Knowing that there's strength in them they can't access without pain.
Well, that's why I think we have to work with the assumption that the kingdom of heaven logic is the right one. Yeah. And it's adjusting ours here, but we still have to live in the ours here.
And that's why I think that's the overlap, because I don't think of that as logic. I think of that as trust, as faith.
Which one do you think of as trust? As
living in the grace of God that creates an atmosphere of suffering that is for your good. Mm-hmm. To live in that successfully logic is insufficient. You have to say, no, I just trust that he's good, that he wants something good for me.
I agree with that. I don't disagree at all. But I do think the other is powerful. So, for example, we have something my wife and I have difficult that we're going through. There has been two scriptures that I've been thinking about almost exclusively. The Hebrews 12, it says, who for the joy set before him he endures the cross, despising its shame. And I just keep going over to that. What does that mean? I'm looking for logic in it.
Right.
I do trust it, but I'm also working and laboring to understand it.
So how do you pick up a cross that is in that cross is the sin that's being sinned against you in this incident, in this situation, and carry it with joy?
Yeah, those are the questions.
So that you can look on those against who are sinning against you with love.
Yeah.
And effortlessly, I don't know, effortlessly, right? But wholeheartedly
so that's what I'm
say,
saying.
God, forgive them.
Two realities pulling at you. The one says, trust me, and live in that without understanding it.
Yeah.
And that's what I have to do. That's what we have to do.
And trust in the face of evidence that seems to scream against the goodness of God.
It seems to be very loud evidence. Yeah. But the other realm is that, no, that evidence, this must is it just to trust it and not understand it, or is it to trust it and then also to seek to understand it? And I think both are true.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, because you reach the limit of your understanding, right? I lean not on my own understanding.
Yeah.
And that all that you have left then is trust.
How does this work out in architecture? Because it works out in architecture too.
Okay, I want to try to show you something. Let's see if the tech will do it.
The tech?
The tech.
Jimmy, our tech guy, is going to throw up on the screen.
All right, so this is a picture of before and after.
Or is this just me seeing it?
No, they're seeing it.
Oh, nice.
So it would look like a before and after in the wrong direction, but it's not. On the top picture there is a building in Budapest.
Time frame?
That was built under the Soviet era, right? Okay. So the Soviets and a lot of Americans, probably communists too, built a lot of monolithic architecture, a lot of buildings that are big slabs and cubes and blocks without decor or ornamentation.
You meant monolithic in the literal. Mono and lithic
literal
being
monolith.
stone.
That's
single
right.
stoned.
And
like
so what Budapest is doing
straight bare lines
is they're literally stripping off the shell that was the Soviet Union's architectural influence and saying, no, we're going to go back.
Is that the bottom?
And so the picture at the bottom is what they're doing. And actually, there's a whole slideshow. This is all going on now.
They're doing
so they're going to old
is
buildings.
That in an old style that reflects other buildings from pre?
It's how the buildings were before.
Okay.
Right? So this is another one. Now, this one they didn't rebuild, but they're cleaning it off, right? It was neglected. And what a lot of Eastern Europe is doing, I'll show you one more, is they are saying, like, so this one was, the building was literally torn down, and now they're putting it back up, but in its original look. Mm-hmm. With the goal being, the goal is that you would stick to your roots or build back the foundation. And what I see and have been learning more about recently is the reaction that the West had to fascism, right, to Hitler, was to run away from everything traditional. So fascism and this is why fascism is called right-wing. It's authoritarian, and so in that way, it's not like the right wing of America. Right wing in America tends to be libertarian. It's authoritarian, but it's tradition-focused, and that's its right-wing aspect. Mm-hmm. And that's where left-right conservative, it's actually conservative more than, it's left-wing conservative is what I would call it. It's left-wing in the sense that it's authoritarian.
Saying we responded to Soviet atheistic communism
by running into, we're going to build in a modern space age way. That's why a lot of the modern stuff you see, which is not contemporary, like what you see with flat roofs and pointy edges that almost looks like a science lab, everything they build. I'm not talking about contemporary, like what's now popular. I'm talking about the modern 50s, 60s. It was saying, we're going to throw off all the tradition. And the tradition was the ornamentation, right? The statuary, all the things that harken back to an older time, a better time. And because the past is not better. We have a bright future. We're going to tear down the past. But modernism quickly got usurped by postmodernism, saying, actually, the future's not that great either. And you're left with a nihilistic self-serving. I remember watching that Everything Everywhere All at Once movie, which was so brilliant in its visuals and so touching in some of its relational aspects. But the whole message is life has no meaning, so just love each other.
Right.
Oh, what a heartbreaking story.
So Schaeffer would have liked this, and he wrote books on this exact thing in the arts. And this whole thing of Kantian, that you can reject God, or not reject God, put God in that realm, live in this realm, but only in human terms. And the result of that was a loss of objective truth. Yeah. And this is what Lewis wrote his book about when he writes about men without chests. And so in any case, what Schaeffer ended up saying is he called the line of despair. That when you philosophically go that direction and abandon absolutes, you fall down into a place of despair where there's no meaning. Yeah. And then he tried to point it through different art and architectural things. This is the line of despair. Look at this. And he would say, look at this beauty. Yeah. Look at this development of artistic work. And now look at this monolithic, plain drabness, intentionally that way. Yeah. Robbed of beauty because there is no beauty of God allowed into the thought world.
Well, and all that's left in art when you reach that level is shock.
Yes, that's right.
I'm going to shock you.
That's right.
Or totally meaningless, I'm going to draw a square.
Yeah. Yeah. So John Cage, musically, he tried to make music with random sound,
Yeah.
with no order, right? And it's like,
Well, that's a Jackson Pollock painting on some level.
and it goes into all the arts. And what I hear you saying though is that we clearly had an adversary in the Cold War against quote unquote atheistic Russia. But what I'm hearing you say that is we unconsciously perhaps began to adopt some similar assumptions, and therefore our architectural styles began to reflect the same thing as well.
It's what we crave, yeah. And it comes from a rejection of tradition. And when your parents beat you, you don't want to grow up and be like them. And so if the tradition is what beat you over the head, you throw away their architecture along with their art and their beauty. But one of the things you forget, I think we've forgotten, is that there is a universality to that truth. There are beautiful buildings, right? And I can go to Beijing or Tokyo. I can go to Greece.
Okay, we're facing this now too, though.
And I'm going to see beauty.
Okay, but wait. I agree with you.
Yeah.
But what our culture is facing in terms of on second thought is that they're saying you can't say that. You can't say that building is more beautiful than that building.
Yeah. And what I'm saying is that's foolish and everybody knows it.
Well, not in the thought world, they don't know it. In a common sense world, yes, you're right, they do.
Yeah, they do.
So that's why I still
Smart
think
people can
I'm going to
convince
say it
themselves of
anyways.
dumb things, though.
Where's the place to say things that can get you in trouble and be brave and yet not be foolish, right? But the obsession with...
Here it is. It's right here.
Here it is.
Yeah.
On second thought, right? Here, obesity as beauty.
That's what I was thinking of too.
Okay, and so the landmine in it, there's a political landmine, which I don't want to care about, but there is a kindness landmine as well. That's a Christian landmine. And that is this. There are, to be obese, I'm using that word instead of fat or whatever, because I just want a clear picture, right, in a sense.
Okay.
It doesn't mean an individual lacks beauty. In fact, I think I have interacted on a personal level, talked to people who I would say would qualify as obese, and you look at them, male and female, and you can say, you can almost see them as a kid. They weren't obese, and they're really an attractive person, right?
Okay.
You can see that attractiveness, and you can see beauty. But the obese thing itself is not beauty. It's not.
Right.
It's not.
That's
beauty.
the point. It's not to say there's no beautiful overweight people.
Yeah.
But being obese
But that's
is a
what
dysfunction.
the argument
It's
of
an
the
expression
left
of
is trying to say. Oh, you must be saying there's all these people that have too much weight. They're not beautiful.
Well,
That's not what's being said.
But what's underneath that, and this is the postmodern idea, is that beauty is arbitrary.
Yes, that's the extreme.
And that's simply not
If it's
true.
all relative, then it's totally up to you, and you have no right to say there's one beautiful building over another, or one beautiful model over another.
Right.
Weight, who cares? Yeah.
Right.
So I do think that's your architecture thing and the postmodern connection. It's legitimate, still an ongoing discussion. The left, what if I made this statement? Tell me what you think about it. They're almost railing with it. They're almost like on a caffeine vibratory high.
See, I think it's like saying trans women are women. I think it's like that, where everybody knows it's not true. It's just they've so prioritized not hurting someone's feelings that it's at any cost.
Yes.
Right.
And
so you're willing to
now
perpetuate
it's
a delusion.
manically going to force you to agree with this.
Right.
If it means I have to kill you to do it, I will.
Yeah.
Or destroy you.
So here's the crazy thing, right? There's studies about like landscape paintings. What do people prefer?
Mm-hmm.
And they've made these generic landscape paintings and taken them around the world to be looked at by literally tribesmen in sub-Saharan Africa, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or Tibetan monks or Americans all over. And everybody has the same idyllic, this is the type of landscape I find ideal. Mm. It's a lake. There's a deer drinking out of it.
Consensus.
There's a path.
Yeah.
There's grassy in the foreground.
Consensus. Yeah.
And there's mountains in the far distance.
Yeah,
Everybody wants that.
Yeah, yeah.
Everybody. And we got it here in Oregon. It's beautiful.
That's true. Okay, here's the question. Should we promised Christian nationalism.
We did. I don't know if we got time now.
Okay. If we push it off for another one.
Well, let's scratch the surface. Because this might be a double episode. I don't have the timer. For some reason I can't see it.
We're close to an hour.
I think we're beyond it. But let's go. What do you got?
think?
You've been doing
You
some
think
homework.
Okay, how about we this? How about
Part
we lay
one.
out my observation in response. I'll say something, then I'm gonna ask you.
You got
for
the
something.
Bible open. You're ready.
Oh yeah, I am.
Okay.
I'm ready for bear, man. I'm not bear. That's too big a
Loaded
phrase.
for bear?
I'm loaded for bear. I'm not.
Where's that come from?
I am, but I don't mean that connotation. Like you're a bear and I got a gun. Okay, I'll make a statement, and then I'm going to ask you for a statement, and then I'll make another statement, and we'll see if we get past
All right.
that.
We'll see.
My first statement is this. I want to acknowledge something you said several episodes ago that I had not thought about, and I told you I'd think about it, and I want to acknowledge I think you were right. When
Disciple
it says,
the nations.
Huh?
Disciple the nations.
Well, it's not the, no, not that. It's close to that. It's the all authority has been given to me.
Oh, okay.
I told you at the time I've never conceived of that as all authority being political.
Right.
When I go back and look at it and meditate on it, thought through, looked up words, it's inescapable that has to include it's all.
Yeah.
It's all authority.
Right.
So the first thing is I thought, okay, I need to change my thought about these verses, this verse. It is all authority. He is saying all authority has been given me, and that does include political. It includes multiple spheres of authority, but it also includes political.
Yeah.
Okay, so then I'm going to go then to what the word therefore means. But before doing that, I want to ask you this. When you say Christian nationalism, there are options of what people mean by it. What do you mean by it, yourself?
I mean, at a fundamental, like the simplest is simply that I want America to be a Christian nation. So that when someone says America was a Christian nation at its founding and people debate whether that's true, I want it to be true now. And what
do you mean by that? Do you
yeah,
mean that
so
it
the way that would
act?
play out, it would be that it would
Does it
establish.
adopt a creed? Does it act out of a moral
It would
framework?
adopt Jesus as Lord. I don't know that it needs to
part
go.
of state constitutions and federal constitutions, Jesus is Lord.
Right.
So is Israel. Make Israel again.
Well, it doesn't. Israel was chosen by God and set apart with a
But
covenant.
I mean by that, I mean a theocracy. Because God said to Israel, I'm your king and I make your laws.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you're putting in big words like theocracy that I don't have ready definitions for. What I'm saying is,
well, theo and rule by God.
I want God's law to inform our laws, right? I want righteousness. Well, you can't create laws about the internet out of the Bible except by applying principles. So in that way, God's law would inform.
Okay.
Right. What I want is
I am on a
Christians to define.
These are clarifying question. I'm not pushing back on anything. I'm just trying to hear you.
Yeah. I want Christianity to define right and wrong in America. I think the way you do that, and I'm not trying to be practical. I'm trying to be idyllic. I mean, by definition, right? But I am saying I think there are a lot of laws you could obviously look at it and say, well, practically the way you get there, I don't know, this, that, or the other compromise. But obvious laws around immigration as ready forms of legal immigration, and yet concrete borders and boundaries. Idolatry to be shunned and rejected, even illegal.
When you say idolatry, do you mean worshiping of a statue?
Yeah.
Or do you mean the love of money?
Yeah, both of those.
How can you do? Okay, I'm not pushing back. I'm trying to understand.
I mean, idolatry fundamentally.
How can you make a law that does something a matter of the heart, loving money?
Right. No, you can't. You can't.
Okay, so you don't mean it that way.
Laws. There are tons of laws right now that require motive for guilt. They require that you prove intentionality. I don't see why you can't do that now with anything. It would require evidence to create that law.
Okay.
So is that a matter of the heart? On some level it is, right?
Okay.
Because it is intent. But what I want at its bedrock is to say, I truly believe that Christianity is the only religion that rightly understands good. And so the role of government is to promote the good. And so the government should be Christian in that way. Should it be controlled by a church organization? I don't think so. So if that's what a theocracy is, I don't want that. And that is, I think, what the founders were aiming for. What the founders assumed in the way they formed a government is that everybody is more or less, if not a Christian, they abide by Christianity. They stand in Christian ground.
Well, and
so therefore,
do you have a disagreement with when I've altered that phrase to theistic moralism? when I've said that in our past conversations?
I don't. I think their
You think
assumption.
that's too weak?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of documentation that the founders would say we're a Christian nation. I mean, the Supreme Court, for crying out loud, said it in 1880 something, that America's a Christian nation. So of course we're going to prefer Christianity over Islam.
So one we don't dispute over in terms of deism is Thomas Jefferson, right? Or no? You think he was a
Thomas
Christian
Jefferson a deist?
Or a deist, yeah.
I don't think he was one thing his whole life. There's good evidence that he became a Christian before his death.
Okay, so that's fine.
But he definitely honored Christ. He saw the teachings
agree.
of Jesus ethically as superior to all other ethical frames.
So before he became that,
So hold on. So Thomas Jefferson putting the teachings of Jesus as the highest ethical standard, but not being a Christian, would therefore be establishing a Christian nation.
I mean, he wouldn't say that. He would say
I think he
was
would have said
establishing a deistic nation
No.
if he was using those terms.
Well, you can't, because then any monotheistic religion,
But he
because
doesn't
he did
believe
look at
that
Islam
Jesus
and
is
rejected
the
it.
Son of God. He doesn't think that God sent an incarnate person in.
Correct. You don't
At
have to
least
be a
in this
Christian
earlier.
to serve in a Christian nation. But Christianity establishes the good. And so Jefferson was living that out. Does that make sense? Because he's saying Christianity is where the way we should form our laws.
Yeah. Okay. Let me use the just for understanding too. The one that's always poked at theonomous which is a New Testament theocratic situation.
Yeah.
The Bible's laws become the United States laws. The Old Testament has the putting to death of homosexual.
Yeah.
Are you saying yes, that would be?
It's not off the table.
It's not off the table.
I mean, if you look at what Uganda's doing, right? There was a headline actually this week.
So not off the table. Okay, go ahead and finish.
So their big accusation this week or months ago was that they had passed a law that was up to the death penalty for certain homosexual. I think it was called aggravated homosexuality, and people took that and ran with it to say how evil that law was. Even Republicans who say they're Christian. Well, what the law actually was is if you are engaged in homosexual rape of a child or of a disabled person, you get the death penalty. Okay. So they don't go all the way and say anyone.
A little
caught
bit of
in
a
this.
different issue.
But also adultery was, those caught in adultery were executed as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not in Uganda, but in the Bible, right? But even then, you see.
And if you picked up sticks on the Sabbath, you were put to death to be stoned.
Yeah, it happened. That happened one time. Yeah.
Well, it's still. I mean,
but it's something.
These are the
right?
questions that get put to theonomists because.
But here's
unclear if this is what they're meaning when they say it that way.
I think it's all on the table. But what I'm saying is, it has to be worked out for sure. The founders worked out in the way they landed on it, right? But we can't just say, well, we don't want a Christian nation because it's too far. Because are you saying God's law isn't perfect and restores the soul, right? What are you saying? Like, we say the Bible is inspired by God and that this law that He gave us is incredible. Now we also have to say. Now, look, Jesus said that Moses gave some laws because of the hardness of people's hearts. So that there's a built-in flexibility the Bible already gives us. But all that has to get worked out. But we can't, therefore, because I don't have a full constitution ready for everyone to sign, say, therefore, we don't look for it.
Yeah.
Right? Or, oh, well, I guess Islam and Christianity are the same moral footing. It's like, that's not true. We might work with some Muslims to get some of the DEI craziness out of schools or the gender ideology. That is happening today in places like Michigan where you have Muslim majority communities. Christians and Muslims are saying, let's work together to take over the school board so we can get the gender theory and the porn out of the middle school library. That sounds great to me, right? But that's the political pragmatism that it will always be required to form a government and a nation. But that doesn't have to say, therefore, we can't aim for the highest good. So I think Christian nationalism is say, let's make a Christian nation. That's the highest good.
Okay. The role of force. Let me ask this question. The role of force. You said the Bible's laws or the kingdom of heaven laws or whatever would be the nation's laws. That's an element of force when you enact a law.
Right, because the government is the entity that we give the monopoly for violence. Therefore, they could use violence to enforce any law that we, as the people, say we're willing to go along with.
You're saying that's our national
That's what governments
perspective? Okay.
That's just the definition of governments. That's what
the other
force
way
is.
to put it would have been, you threw me by your language, would have been that God gave the sword to the state, not to individuals.
Right.
The sword being violence, and the state being this entity that is not the church, nor is it a family, nor is it a community. It's this certain level of organized.
Yeah,
something.
but it's the state, it's the government we get to organize. So it is the
However
community on
it
some
gets
level.
there, whether it's appointed through a monarchy or if we get to it through a democracy
Or we're
a
conquered
republic.
by our neighbors.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a level at which it seems to say God is over this level and gives them this level. And that was written at a time when Rome was occupying that level and it had begun to turn sour for the Christian community.
Right.
So it's said with a full knowledge of the abusiveness of that level that it can exercise.
Yeah. So you're speaking about Romans 13. The way the way the founders would have read that, and I tend to agree with them, is that God gives the sword to them to enforce the good, right? To create a good thing, to do what's right. I can't remember the phrasing in Romans 13. What the founders would have said is when they stop doing right is when they stop being given by God. So when a government says, you know what, we're going to mandate that your kids get chemically castrated, that government is no longer bearing the sword from God. They've taken on themselves something that nobody should take. And that's when governments get thrown off. That's why the Revolutionary War happened.
I was just going to say, so my qualifying thing, we'll see if you agree or not, is that yes, they did use that logic. That was actually the logic towards King George.
Yeah.
But they did not implement that logic on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Just because that they did not implement it.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
if you misused your authority, it didn't mean you lost your God-ordained status. In fact, that would end up meaning Paul's argument doesn't hold water because he's saying it in the face of Nero and Caligula and those who have clearly lost their acting out of justness, and yet Paul's saying still submit to them. They haven't lost it. To me,
Well, I think in a sense, because what I read that to mean, and I don't know what years Nero came into power and the thing, versus when Romans was written.
There's several names there, yeah.
But what I'm saying is that much of the New Testament is written to peasant, poor people living in your local magistrate, the policeman walking down the street. Give honor, obey him. He's just trying to help. That's not the same as saying, what nation should men form and how should we establish governments. I don't think it's trying to speak to that same level.
Is saying even when they are behaving poorly, you're to submit to them. Not necessarily to do any wrong, right? But it's assuming there's a poor behavior on their part. In fact, that's the very point of, is it Titus, the start of Titus? When it says, pray for those in authority over you, for you were once like them. So the logic there is, you know what it feels like to be lost and doing evil and hardly be aware of it, and yet you're aware of it, but you're hardly not.
Right.
You know what that's like, therefore be at peace with those that are doing that to you. It's a crazy logic internally.
Yeah, and the other side of that is those things are written to people who are under despotic rule. They're living under tyranny.
You're
in a
saying
sense.
As a democracy, there's more liberty for self-government than they had.
Yeah, and we're not a democracy, and the founders never wanted us to be, right? But yes, the America's king is its people. And so we read, I think, Romans 13 wrongly when we read it to mean that our governor or our president have some rule over us, when in fact, we have rule over them.
The lens we need to use is the governmental structure that is being occupied, whether it's monarchy or democracy.
But part of the insidious
republic.
nature of corrupt power is to convince the American people that they are subjects.
Yes. Okay.
And so I mean, this is not Christian nationalism, but it is saying what's our role now? What should we be doing as Christians in a self-governing state?
Yes.
And that's where resistance, I think, becomes very relevant.
Well, that's my next question on force. Trying to hear you and understand what when I interact with the idea of Christian nationalism as you're trying to represent, I want to interact with what you're saying, not something I've patched together.
There's a lot of other people.
Yeah. So I've asked the question about force in terms of the law, and you said yes, that use of force. The other use of force that's on the table for Christian nationalists is illustration to bomb a abortion center, or to January 6th. You said it was a riot but not an insurrection. What you meant by that is that there was riotous behavior, but there was no attempt to overthrow the government.
Correct.
So in the sense that the riotous behavior is not the use of force to a Christian end, but an insurrection could be. So blowing up an abortion clinic or overthrowing the government in an insurrection, would you say Christian nationalism, as you're understanding it, includes that use of force as legitimate? Should you take the life of...
I think Christianity gives you a framework. Every Christian, and I think non-Christian nationalists would agree with this, that Christianity gives you a framework for when war is just. I don't think that's distinct to Christian nationalism at all. Do I think that we're at a place where you can justify acts of violence as a means to overthrow the current government? I don't think we are, but I don't think we're far from it.
Because Timothy McVeigh thought we were.
Well, Timothy McVeigh, yeah, that's a more interesting story.
It is an interesting story.
Because I don't know that he actually did believe that, or that
he wrote
was
it.
Guilty of what he was accused of.
Wait, did I say the wrong name?
No,
Unabomber.
Oklahoma City.
Oh, no, I didn't mean Timothy McVeigh. That's Oklahoma City. Unabomber. Kaczynski.
Ted Kaczynski.
Ted Kaczynski.
Yeah, he did.
He wrote it in his manifesto.
He wasn't a
we are
Christian.
at war. He wasn't a Christian, but he believed that the state, the techno-state, would probably been more accurate for him to say, was at war with the American people. They just didn't know it. And
the American people don't know it.
The American people didn't know it. And he said, I am trying to minimize, I have no intention to kill innocents.
Right.
But I have no problem with killing those that are at war.
I'm not calling for war, if that's what you're asking.
No, I wasn't asking that. I'm just trying to clarify the use of force. That's what I'm actually, these couple questions have been about when you understand Christian nationalism, its role of force. Because to me, that's one of the issues, I see basically three perspectives. There's the influence perspective, that Christian nationalism is about, we want to influence our government for good.
Yeah.
There's the force that we want to say Christian morality should be the law of the land.
Yeah.
And then there's a third force, and if it's not, we're right to tear down what's violating.
Well, if you're running a government, the government gets to do that, right?
Well, no, I'm talking about if you're a Christian nationalist, you hold a view, you're not in government, or you may be in government, it doesn't matter, but this is what you think should go. So, for example, this is what you think is legitimate.
I think Republicans are better than Democrats, that at least in a Republican-controlled state, you have some chance of godliness, right? But that doesn't mean, therefore, I think there should be revolution.
Well, yes, and that's the point. Either big revolution or revolutionary acts, let's say. So the people who blow up abortion centers.
Yeah, but what does blowing up abortion centers have to do with Christian nationalism?
Because it is saying there is an evil in the land, and it is right. If I believe that the moral framework of Christianity should rule our country, both by influence, then the second tier, by force of law, and then I'm going to go to the third tier, by force of arms, if need be.
So do
you believe... murdering babies... If somebody came in right now to murder you and held a gun, I would not feel a qualm to try to defend you or to stop this murder.
Okay. So are you promoting a violent overthrow of our current government?
No, I'm just trying to hear which layer that you're advocating for, in a sense.
So I think that violent revolution on some level will be our reality in the coming years. I wouldn't bet on it, but I probably wouldn't bet against it either. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, and as Americans,
I'm not calling for it just because I want Christianity to rule the world. I want Christ to be king of every nation. Mm-hmm. I think that's part of the Great Commission. Mm-hmm. I don't see any part of that as like a violent overthrow. I think there is a right of free people to fight in just wars and with a clear conscience.
But those are just...
But that doesn't mean I'm going to overthrow a government
to
establish Christ.
The revolution, American Revolution, is an overthrow of a government.
It is.
So you're saying that's not a part of Christian nationalism as an option?
No, I'm not saying it's not. I'm saying I'm not calling for it.
Oh, okay. It's legitimate. It's not the time.
I think that you could argue that in any nation... there's a right of people to say, we won't stand for this anymore, and to fight against their government and overthrow it if the level of corruption in that government is so oppressive.
Okay.
And I think the way you do that, and the abortion clinic example we've talked about before, is you can justify that violence when violence is the only recourse. So as long as your voice can be heard, as long as there's freedom of speech, as long as there's a political process that you can function within that's peaceful, that you don't have any business bombing anybody.
So what you're articulating right now is a theory of escalation, in a sense. When is
Just
it
like
legitimate to escalate?
If your neighbor comes over to argue with you about the garbage cans and where they go, right? You don't get to punch him just because he disagrees with you. Mm-hmm. But if he punches you, now there's a different story, and your government can do that too. So the government's been putting a lot of people in prison lately unjustly. And so there's a question. This is the current question. This is why I think war could easily happen in our country, is that the question is, what recourse do we have? We have elections, maybe. Do we even have elections, right?
Yeah.
Can we retreat
I don't think
back?
we're having them.
I've heard several conservative voices saying it's time to retreat into red states and establish something that's viable over there. Let Oregon, fall off the cliff.
According to your theory of escalation, you wouldn't be against that as a pursuit of a peace by a peaceful means.
But if you look at what tyrannical governments do, one of the things they do is inhibit travel. You don't get to leave East Germany.
You just think it would be a strategically poor choice. It's letting in the fox into the henhouse, so to speak.
What would be?
If you separate into, because I just reframed your red state development and blue state development as you don't like that argument, but I said, according to your escalation by peace, that's a reasonable argument, but you're saying, I don't know, because that's a Trojan horse to go further. And so we
I'm not saying I'm against or for moving to a red state.
Okay.
I pray about it on a regular basis, whether it be just on a wisdom.
Okay,
like
but
if there's
now
a point where
talking about
they're gonna imprison
an
you and take
individual
your house.
choice. What we were really talking about before was a movement to say this should be a strategy nationwide. Let them have their states. Let the blue states see how they fail.
Well, there is a movement going on.
I know.
Yeah.
And you're saying you don't agree with that strategically, even though
I'm not saying that.
Oh, you're not saying
No,
that. Okay.
I'm just saying I haven't moved yet. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay,
I don't know
so
what
from the
future holds.
three things then of Christian nationalism, let me ask one final question about it. The first being influence. It's for influence. The second being is laws, and the third being it's even forceful anti-warfare in a sense. You would say that that's all on the table. Would you say the one of influence counts as being Christian nationalism, or that's not worthy of the name?
I wouldn't call it. I think that's standard Christianity. We want to have.
I agree.
We want to make Christian
I agree
music
with you.
and Christian
I don't
movies.
agree with these three levels of Christian nationalism. I think only the last two are Christian nationalism. Should have a right to that title.
I would say it's the difference between step 1 and step 2 is what Christian nationalism is about. Because I think 3 is a red herring, in the sense that if I say I want God's law to inform and establish a Christian nation, that Christianity defines right and wrong in America, I think the red herring is to say, oh, you want to make everyone a Christian by the point of a gun. And it's like, no,
you're not saying that.
I know, but when you bring in that violent overthrow and establishment of
I don't
Christianity,
think that's.
But the real question is how much Christianity gets to influence government. In other words, is it a permeable boundary between church and state? What is that separation?
That is a significant question. I think the reason the other question is important is the role of force, and because I think there is a difference between force through law and force through military action.
Yeah. Well, so let's look at the Bible, right? Because God doesn't only judge Israel for evil. He also judges Nineveh. He judges Babylon. He judges neighboring countries.
Okay. Well, let's do this instead. Let's pause that.
Okay.
Because of time, and I'm going to make a summarized statement, one word, and then we'll pick it up again. How about that?
Okay. Well, let me finish my point really quick.
All
Okay.
right.
And that is that all these nations face God's judgment, but they don't face it because they didn't have a tabernacle or a temple, but they did face it because they lost track of God's definition of justice. Mm-hmm. I think America has lost track of that as well. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of what we're spiraling into is a pagan form of justice where you protect your tribe and you kill your neighbor. Mm-hmm. And what's going to happen at the end of that, right? The end of that Kantian despair, right? The postmodern woe is me is not coming to your senses and returning to Christ. that will happen, but on a large scale, the end of it is pagan deities and child sacrifice and the levels of debauchery we can't imagine. And that's what America's moving toward.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're not Israel, but God doesn't judge us for the law based on those laws. He judges us based on what he expects all nations to live righteously by, which is his word. And so when I want to throw off paganism or postmodernism or even enlightenment and say, no, it's the Bible informs. It might be logical, but it's not biblical. And it should be biblical if we're going to institute it as law so we can return to where justice comes from, which is a good God.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
So in summarizing then, I agree with you that the Christian influence is not really what's being said when people are talking about Christian nationalism today.
Right.
That's just somebody's trying to make an acceptable case for everybody. Because that's where I would say I am. Yeah. I believe that Christianity should influence, the more it influences the nation, the better. But I'm not in the other two categories that you would be in. Okay, so we can move forward.
So how do you define the separation between category 1 and category 2? In other words, I say it should be influencing to the point where, almost to the point of exclusion of other forms of ethics and law. So, like, how do I know when I've stepped past into category 2? From influence to
it's the rule. Yes.
Is that what it is?
Okay, from 1 to 2, not 2 to 3.
Right.
From 1 to 2, because I would agree that occupying position 1, that I would like Christianity to influence our nation and its laws, that ends up meaning laws that are made and enacted out in the country.
Yeah.
But where I think there's a difference is, I think that those laws are to have a general theistic appeal rather than a Christian appeal. So if you're not a Christian, I want a law that is reasonable to you as well as to me if I am a Christian. And that reasonableness, I think, needs to come from you have a fundamental theist. There is a creator. You might not be a Christian, you might not be religious, but you believe there's a creator, nature and nature's laws. That's what I think is written.
Yeah, natural law. Yeah.
Natural law. And that's why I mentioned the Tao a long time ago. And when you said beauty that was seen universal, I think there are laws that are seen and acknowledged in the 80-20 split of things to be universally understood.
Okay.
Theft, etc., whatever, lying. And so when I say I want Christianity influence, I mean in that realm of theistic. In a sense, it's loosely Christian. Or in a sense, I would even say this. Could back off and say it's not technically Christian. Mm-hmm. It's theistic influence rather than Christian influence. I do think Christianity heightens the experience or awareness of theistic morality. So, for example, you folks were here and we talked about turning the other cheek and just mentioned how it's a difficult passage.
Yeah.
Now, what's so interesting about that, it is an explicitly Christian passage.
Yeah.
And yet it informs a theistic moral approach because they do still wrestle. If you don't believe in Jesus, but you believe in a creator, you still wrestle with what's the appropriate force. The Civil War, in part, got stretched on until Sherman comes and marches and burns down because he says we have the atomic bomb. We have to assert this level of force to stop this destruction.
Right.
It was highly debated even at the time.
Yeah.
And disagreed with. No, that's too much. No, we need to win. And Sherman argued, if we keep using too little force, we hurt more people further and longer, right? So I'm just saying that theistically, you don't have to be a Christian to deal with the turn the other cheek idea that originally comes to us from Jesus. But it works its way into theistic natural law as well. I think Apache Indians.
What it sounds like you're doing, though, is making a rational argument in favor of Christian teaching without using the authority of Christian scripture. Is that about right?
Okay, I'd be open to that. Yeah, that theism is not grounded in scripture technically.
So then I think the only distinction between us is, because the weakness I see of that, even though I agree with that, right?
Yeah. Well,
I see that as a tactic that's really relevant to trying to talk to someone about why you believe the way you believe, whether it's about religion or politics. Mm-hmm. What I see, though, when you never call on the authority of a higher power, one, you're leaving your biggest weapon off of the fight.
No, that's not correct.
Because Christ said...
Not on a higher power. I think the...
Oh, theistic.
Yeah,
okay.
theistic. The deists we're calling on a higher
Yeah,
power.
but once you say theistic, if you're only in natural law, you can't say God says, because someone's going to say, well, which God?
I know, but even when they say that, it's remarkable. The gods of Hindu, the god of Buddhism, the gods of Islam, Islam's not quite fair because it is really Judeo-Christian, but they hold the same kinds of results about stealing, about lying, about violence and kindness. There's a great similarity shared when you do have other deities.
Yeah, there's some really big differences, though.
I agree. There's some
Right.
big differences.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, we don't have to get into
Yeah.
too much of that.
So here's
what,
the last. Go ahead.
what I was saying is that what I see as the distinction is, I think what you're saying is that you can make a natural law argument, let's say against abortion, right? That there's a very rational, science-based.
Yeah. Yep.
This is a distinct human being with its own DNA, with its own
There's
life,
a value. There's a creator.
even at conception.
Yeah.
But someone who's pro-abortion, who wants that available to them, is going to have what they would argue their own rational thought. And so at some point, you're going to get to that agree to disagree point on something that feels very fundamental. And that's the only resolution is say, no, God says. And so that's where I would go. Mm-hmm. And I would say, no, therefore, God says, therefore, we make it illegal.
Okay, what is it that God says?
Well,
using this illustration.
About abortion?
Yeah.
Well, that he knit us in our mother's womb, that we're fearfully and wonderfully made, that there's a mystery to our creation. He condemns those who kill unborn babies.
I don't know that a prior generation of people who weren't Christians, they were theists only or even deists. They might quabble over the word knit in the womb in terms of a deist. I don't know how they see how active he is. That's probably language that means he put this in motion, right? The clock works this way.
Yeah, well, he knew you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they would still be able to resort to this. Yeah, you don't kill this person because we know this is a person inside this mommy's tummy.
You're talking about deists of the founding era. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Right. My argument is
an
that
older day.
the morality of a founding era deist or theist, either one, is just Christianity. And they threw off a couple of they had a couple of moral frames that they didn't want to accept. But otherwise, it's just Christianity. And the reason is because they were in a Christian culture.
My point was that
and
when
so
you
see that today when someone says,
God,
I appeal to natural law and therefore I reject or I accept abortion, I accept all these other things. That's the frame working now.
Well, then I think that if you had a person that was like that and they appeal to natural law, even if there are people that are natural law that are atheists, they don't believe in a God.
Right.
But they believe in the same natural law, they just get to it in a different way. I think there's room for conversation with that kind of a person in the United States because they're still recognizing that there's value to a human.
Okay.
So if they still wanted abortion, let's say, and they wanted the right to kill a 6-month-old in the uterus baby,
why not out of the uterus? Why not
that
6
would be
months
my
after
argument
birth?
with them.
Yeah.
And if they want to argue with me, that's fine, they can argue, but there's not reasonable, right? They've lost reason when they've said it's a person outside and a person a day earlier.
So this harkens
inside.
back to, and I know we're trying to wrap this up because there's a lot more to cover, but this also harkens back to our previous conversation about, does reason hold the highest seat of authority? I would say no, that Christianity includes reason, but forces reason to submit.
So when you say Christianity, I'm going to define that for you, meaning revealed Bible Jesus Christianity.
That's the only one I know of.
No, there is. Okay, pre-Matthew, pre-New Testament.
Okay.
There was an Old Testament, which was Israel's God.
Yeah.
Now he said, "I'm the God of everybody," but right now I'm not pushing that agenda.
Okay.
Or I'll restate it because you can push back on that. It would be fair. I'm not pushing that claim until it's into all of its fullness.
Yeah, he has a plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So right now, these scriptures are for Israel and between us and Israel. Now I'm telling you that I'm actually your God too. And the same thing I'm doing with them is the things you should be doing, but I'm not going to push that claim right now. New Testament comes along, Jesus comes along, and God starts to push that claim.
Okay.
Okay? In that light, then, all of those other, it's not revealed revelation, that enables one to say human life has dignity and value and we shouldn't take it. They're not Christianity in that sense. It's not revealed. It's natural law, theistic revelation. It's by the light of nature.
Right.
What we see as a creator, we see people are unique, and you go spread across religious movements with other deities or nations or peoples that say this is our God, and they still hold that conclusion.
Right.
So what I'm saying is that with the person in America who says, no, I want to kill this baby, who is a person, I can argue, I don't care which religion they choose. I don't care if they choose atheism. Natural light and reason in general is against them.
So are you still, though, submitting to their willingness to accept that reason?
So in that sense...
Or are you willing to enforce your reason over theirs?
No. See, I think in my perspective, the United States is not forcing revealed revelation as the reason for you to submit to this nation's laws.
No, I'm asking about the reason.
I know. It's the reason that comes from, the reasonableness that comes from a creator, the nature of create, whatever it was said.
Yeah.
Creator and nature's God.
The laws of nature and nature's God.
Yeah. Nature's God. So nature's God leaves a lot of room. But I think what it does is it makes the discourse to get to agreement to be one that has a sacred foundation, but the realm of working through it is rationality. Do I think that's the best? No, I think revealed revelation is right, but I don't think it is for nations.
Why not?
Can we do that later?
Next time. That's a big question, yeah.
Actually, what I want to leave you with is the word therefore. So in my notes, my word therefore, that's what I want to tell you where I want to go.
Okay.
I'm going to give you, I agree, all authority has been given to me.
Okay.
I was incorrect in my thought.
He's the ruler of kings. He's the king of all the kings.
And of all the authority they hold in every sphere.
That's right.
So all authority has been given to
every
political,
institution,
family, individual autonomy.
Of course, yeah.
Right? All the ones that have a legitimate sphere. Spiritual, heavenly, heaven and earth, and below the earth. Okay, if you take the whole thing. They're all been given to him now. Therefore. My fundamental argument is that the therefore only works in one realm. Of all those options that he has, he's saying only one of them means here's what I want you to go do. And it's the spiritual dynamic of his kingdom, not the political, not the family. It affects them, but it's not in those realms.
Okay.
He's not implementing the authority that was given to him politically, or given to him family, or given to him personally. He's implementing the spiritual authority of heaven to go, therefore, having gone, it's a past present passive verb, having gone, disciple, actually nations. It's not make disciples even, it's disciple as a verb, disciple nations, baptize them, and we say in the name of the Father as if it's a formula for baptism. That's not really what it is. It could be that, but it's more likely baptize them into this name.
Into the name,
which is more of a character identity. Put them in this character of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Right. You're putting them into the family.
Yes.
You're bringing them into the family.
I think the word baptize there is much larger than what we might see on a Sunday service. That's not what's in mind there, even though it doesn't exclude that. It is more this go to the nations, discipling them after what I've given you, immersing them into what I've given you.
Right.
And I'll be with you always.
Yeah.
So
it'll be interesting to carry this next episode.
Yeah. Okay. Whew. How long did we go? We don't even know.
We'll find out when we hit stop.
That's the end of our time. All right. You're listening to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke.
Yeah.
Let's say this. Oh, you know what? We totally missed our recommendations and our promo.
Man, we were going to be good today.
If you've enjoyed this podcast and found something you like to think about or reconsider, or something you've never thought about, I fear we may have lost some folks during postmodernism, but that's all right. Go ahead, but if you liked it, click a like on your screen. Find somebody that you can share it with and talk to it about. Start a good discussion. And remember that truth is freedom. See you later.
Truth is freedom. Ooh, I like that one. Freedom. All right.
See you next time.
See ya.